Why do you think it's so difficult to give and receive advice? And why is it difficult to essentially show someone the way?
Take something like writing a book. A lot of people maybe listening have never thought of writing a book. But then again, we just got a bunch of everyday people to write a book called 18 and Lost. So are we, to show that, people can do creative things, can contribute. You really don't need permission or authority to create something valuable. And that's a good asset for me and those other authors for our careers kind of forever. What a great way to open up a relationship, send it as a gift to someone you want to bring into your network, leverage it for further opportunities. I've just got a paid writing contract with someone to help them with their book off the back of that and public. So it can go anywhere. Now, I was watching a video from one of my favorite thinkers and podcasters, Tim Ferriss, who's a very accomplished author, giving advice to authors. And this is why advice is so tricky and everyone kind of gets it wrong. He's talking about his perspective. You should only do a book if you're going to do a really good job of it. His argument was that a mediocre book will hurt you more than doing no book. And that if you're going to take it seriously, make it your priority for a year, then you should do it. Even if you have a business, he says it should be your priority ahead of that. So that was his advice. I actually found it quite ironic because in the same YouTube video, he's talking about his journey to write his first very big kind of best-selling book, The 4-Hour Workweek, how it wasn't a conscious choice. He was actually actively looking not to write a book. And then he was giving this lecture all the time at universities and stuff. And he would keep doing this lecture on all these kind of things he writes, like the outsourcing and the cool digital hacks and all this stuff in the book. And some student, as a smart ass, said, why don't you just write a book instead of teaching this all the time and just be done with it? And he's like, the idea stuck with him. Then it was a compulsion. He couldn't stop seeing it in his brain. And he's like, it was going to be easier just to write it down than not write it down. So for me, that somewhat contradicts his actual advice, for one, because it wasn't this conscious decision to make this amazing book. It was a very like, I just got to get it out. I just got to get it out. And so I find it actually a bit counterintuitive that if we'd taken that advice for 18 and Lost, we wouldn't have made it.
Yeah.
And there's literally no regret about that book. We're using that. That's been the launch pad for the Constant Student. That's been the launch pad for the intentional gap year that Byron's launching. Tyler McConnell from Chapter 3 has an idea for a similar book on relationships using the same format now. Josh Hodge talks about the confidence it gave him to go to his startup. So you no matter, and I've built a network and everything, but we had this very let's just flip a book. Let's just get in, do it 1 month. Doesn't have to be too serious. Let's just do it. So we actually had the opposite focus. It actually probably improved much more in quality than we thought. Like going into it, just, do it, launch it, maybe do another one the next month. We actually put way more polish on it than initially intended. So if we'd followed the advice, we would have been worse off. Yeah, he's a very successful, credible, best-selling author. You got someone like Seth Godin, who's like, everyone should write a book. There's no reason not to. You just get so much out of it. Not so much direct money, which people might not understand because they sell books. But he goes, no one who's done it has ever regretted it. Tim Ferriss is almost like talking about. So,
where do you, Joe? Sorry, I'll just jump in. Where do you think he was going with that advice specifically? Was there much background to it, or?
Well, that is the actual problem and point. So Tim Ferriss gets reached out to a lot, right? And he doesn't like it. He's very clear on that. Like, he gets hassled. A lot of these questions, people are looking to be able to replicate some of the things he's done. We talked about this a while ago. The first impulse when you're on a bit of a creative self-discovery journey is like, how did others do it? Alex Bernine, The Third Door. How did all the successful people get their careers going? And it's kind of like, first you think that everyone else has the answers and you just got to find out what they're all doing and you got to do it. The problem is they've all done it different ways. And this comes back to the blue unicorn principle. Everyone's actually has these unique gifts but also unique hang-ups and weaknesses. So Tim Ferriss doesn't really like this whole everyone reaching out to him. He struggled with it. You got someone who's a good friend of his, Derek Sivers. Derek Sivers' website, he encourages people to reach out to him, not for advice and stuff, but he just encourages you to just tell you his story. I just emailed him once, just told him my story and said, thanks for doing this. I'm not asking for anything. This is just who I am, what I'm working on, and love your stuff. So it's like, what's the right way to be famous? What's the right way to get famous? What's the right way to make a career? What's the right way to go out a book? Kind of like, it's a bit hard to grasp for people, but I don't think there is a way. Because I have different initial kind of competencies to you, Luke, right? And Scott's a good friend of ours as well. Everyone knows that I do a lot of work with Scott. Scott and I have very different kind of core competencies or things that we're better at compared to each other too. So because I've started the Constant Student, I'm going to start focusing a bit more on writing as a niche because that's something I'm stronger in. I've got a bit of credibility, momentum with, and that's easier to kind of bring people into that kind of ecosystem. If Scott was starting the Constant Student, it probably wouldn't be in his skill set. So it'd probably be better to build out the ecosystem of people and by focusing on e-commerce, which he's got a lot of credibility and runs on the board with. And obviously he's learned a lot about that sort of business. So it's not like there's one way to do something, just like there's not one way to write a book. And that's why I think advice is so tricky, because advice should be completely customized to the individual and the situation they're in, down to the individual and the circumstances they're in.
Like Tim's giving a very general advice to a massive audience without being specific at all. So it's seems a little bit challenging for people to take it the right way when there's so many different ways you can interpret it.
That's the problem with advice.